At 2:13 in the morning, Sergeant Thomas Vance stepped into room 408, believing Eleanor Bennett was asleep. He had come for one thing, a small brass key taped beneath her Bible. What he did not know was that Eleanor had spent 32 years inside a courthouse learning one rule that dishonest men almost always forgot. People who lie watch the evidence. People who know the truth watch the liar. Eleanor opened her eyes. And Sergeant Vance stopped moving. 5 days earlier, nothing about the morning suggested that her life was about to change. At 64, Eleanor Bennett had settled into the kind of life she once thought belonged only to other people. She was a black widow living in Ashford, Georgia, in the same red brick house where she and her late husband, Samuel, had raised 2 children. She attended New Hope Baptist Church on Sundays, volunteered 3 mornings a week at the Ashford Senior Outreach Center, and still made too much cornbread whenever anyone came for supper. On Tuesdays, she sat with Patricia Sloan, a retired labor and delivery nurse who had known Samuel before Eleanor had, and they argued cheerfully about hymn selection the way other people argued about politics. For 32 years, she had worked in the county courthouse records office. She knew deeds. She knew liens. She knew signatures. She knew the private habits of men who signed things, which judge initialed in the margin, which clerk stapled instead of clipped, which magistrate distrusted the computer so thoroughly that he had spent 2 decades quietly correcting it by hand. That last one had always made her smile. Paul Mercer, senior magistrate, had never forgiven the software failure of 1998 that misplaced 40 filings in a single afternoon. Ever since, he had added his own 3-digit internal sequence to every emergency order he signed, a small, stubborn number tucked into the docket line, invisible to anyone who did not know to look for it. The clerks teased him about it. He never stopped. Eleanor had processed thousands of those documents. She could have recited the pattern in her sleep. Most of all, she knew that dangerous documents rarely looked dangerous. They arrived in clean envelopes. They used polite language. And they usually asked frightened people to sign quickly. That Monday morning, Isaiah Turner walked into the outreach center, carrying one of those envelopes. Isaiah was 79, a retired school custodian who had lived in the same little white house on Hawthorne Street for 46 years. His wife had died 3 winters earlier. Since then, he kept her rose bushes alive because, as he often told Eleanor, somebody ought to remember what she planted. He placed the envelope on Eleanor's desk. "They say I owe $28,000. Eleanor removed her reading glasses. "For what?" "A roof." She looked at him. "Your roof." Isaiah nodded. "I didn't ask anybody for a roof. The papers came from a company called Southern Heritage Home Renewal. According to the documents, a city safety inspector had discovered dangerous storm damage at Isaiah's property 8 days earlier. The company claimed Isaiah had authorized emergency repairs. The bill was $28,400. Until payment was made, Southern Heritage had placed a contractor's lien against his home. Eleanor turned to the signature page. Isaiah's name appeared at the bottom. "Did you sign this?" "I signed something." "What did they tell you it was?" "Permission to cover a broken gutter." Eleanor looked up. $28,000 for a gutter? Isaiah gave a tired smile. "I was hoping you could explain that part." He had been discharged from Ashford Memorial Hospital that morning after treatment for an irregular heartbeat. Before he even reached home, a city vehicle was waiting outside his house. A safety inspector told him a neighbor had reported storm damage. 20 minutes later, Southern Heritage arrived. They said the city could declare the house unsafe if I didn't let them fix it. Was a police officer there? Isaiah nodded. Sergeant Vance. That name made Eleanor pause. Thomas Vance had served in Ashford for nearly 18 years. People knew him. That was not the same as saying they trusted him. Eleanor returned to the documents. Then she noticed the first impossible detail. The official city complaint had been recorded at 11:42 that morning. but Southern Heritage's emergency work order had been created at 11:26, 16 minutes earlier. Eleanor checked again. "Isaiah, what time did you leave the hospital?" 11:15. She placed the two pages side by side. Somebody had prepared to repair Isaiah Turner's house before anyone officially reported a problem with it. That could have been a clerical mistake. Eleanor had seen thousands of clerical mistakes. But then she turned to the final page. A notarization number was printed beneath Isaiah's signature. She knew the numbering system. The document had not been notarized that Monday. It had been registered 3 days earlier, before Isaiah had ever left the hospital. Eleanor slowly removed her glasses. Isaiah watched her. "What is it?" She looked at the $28,000 lien, then at the signature, then at the date. "Mr. Turner," she said quietly, "I don't think they came to fix your roof." He swallowed. "Then what did they come for?" Eleanor folded the document closed. "Your house." And before noon, she would discover that Isaiah Turner was not the first person they had chosen. He was simply the first one who had brought the paperwork to someone who knew where to look. Ruth Whitaker was 82 and had taught third grade for almost 40 years. Her husband had built their home himself. 2 weeks after Ruth returned from a diabetes appointment at Ashford Memorial, a city inspector appeared at her door, claiming an electrical hazard had been reported. Southern Heritage replaced part of her breaker panel. The final bill was $19,000. Ruth had signed what she believed was permission for an inspection. Instead, the document allowed the company to place a lien against the property if payment was not made within 30 days. She sat across from Eleanor with her purse in her lap, holding it the way people hold things in waiting rooms. "I feel foolish." Eleanor looked across the table. "No. I signed it." "You signed what they told you was an inspection form. I should have read every word." Eleanor leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitaker, a person does not earn the right to deceive you, because the print is small." The older woman lowered her eyes. That sentence changed something in the room. Isaiah stopped twisting his cap between his hands. Ruth's shoulders came down half an inch. And Eleanor understood then that the money was only part of what had been taken from them. Someone had made respectable people feel ashamed for trusting official-looking documents. Eleanor knew that kind of shame. It silenced people better than threats ever could. She found the third name the next afternoon. Calvin Brooks was 76, a retired Army cook who had come home after knee surgery to find a city employee measuring his front steps. Southern Heritage arrived the same day. He now owed $14,800 for a porch that had cost less than $3,000 to build. Eleanor drove out to Pinder Road with a folder on the passenger seat. Calvin opened the door 6 inches. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Eleanor Bennett. I work at the Outreach Center. I know who you are. I'd like to look at your paperwork." No. She waited. He did not close the door, but he did not open it either. "Mr. Brooks, a police officer stood on that porch," Calvin said, "in a uniform, with a piece of paper from the county. And you're standing here in a church dress telling me it's fake. I'm telling you it may be. Same thing, from where I'm standing." His hand tightened on the frame. "I signed it. That's the end of it. If I start hollering about it now, they come back. And next time, maybe they bring the part where I go to jail." Eleanor kept her voice level. "Nobody is going to jail for asking a question." Calvin looked at her for a long moment, and what she saw in his face was not stubbornness. It was arithmetic. He was 76. He had one house, and no one left to help him fight for it. Every day he stayed quiet was a day nothing got worse. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd like you to go on now." The door closed. Eleanor sat in her car for a while before starting it. 2 files on the seat beside her, and a third one behind a locked door, and that third one told her more than the other 2 combined. They had not simply stolen money. They had built something that made people afraid to say it out loud. At 6 that evening, her daughter Rachel arrived carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Rachel Bennett was 37, an accountant for a regional grocery company in Macon, and possessed the family habit of recognizing trouble before anyone admitted it existed. She looked at the folders. "Mom, I know. You always say that right before doing something you know I'm going to worry about." Eleanor smiled. Rachel sat beside her. "What did you find?" Eleanor showed her the dates. Rachel studied them. These work orders were created before the complaints. Every one. Maybe the city entered the complaints late. That's possible. Rachel pointed at the hospital discharge papers. "But why are all three people coming home from Ashford Memorial?" Eleanor said nothing. Rachel looked at her. "You noticed that already." "I noticed." Then Rachel did something Eleanor had not expected. She turned Isaiah's contract over and started reading the back. The part with the small type and the payment instructions. The part nobody reads. "Mom, who's Safe Years Foundation?" "I don't know. Southern Heritage doesn't take the payment. Look." Rachel tapped the remittance block. "The lien is held by the contractor, but the settlement payments route to a nonprofit. No, that's not how any of this works. A construction company doesn't hand its receivables to a charity. Unless the charity isn't a charity. Unless the charity is where the money goes to stop being anybody's." Rachel was already photographing the page. "Nonprofits file annual returns. Public record. Give me a few days." Eleanor watched her daughter's face. The same expression Samuel used to get over a carburetor. "Rachel, don't say it. I was going to say thank you." "That's worse," Rachel said. "That means you're planning to do the dangerous part yourself." The next morning, Eleanor visited the city's code enforcement office. A young clerk named Daniel Price searched the complaint system. Isaiah's case appeared exactly as his printed notice showed. 11:42 a.m. "Can you tell who filed it?" Eleanor asked. Daniel hesitated. "Anonymous complaint. Telephone. Online portal. Can you see when the portal session began?" Daniel looked around before lowering his voice. "Mrs. Bennett, you used to work at the courthouse. You know I'm not supposed to hand out internal system data." "I didn't ask you to." She closed her notebook. "I asked whether the information exists." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Yes, that was enough. As Eleanor left City Hall, Sergeant Thomas Vance stood beside his patrol vehicle. He watched her cross the steps. "Mrs. Bennett." "Sergeant." "I hear you're asking questions about Mr. Turner's property. People talk quickly around here." "They do." Vance smiled, but his eyes did not. "Southern Heritage is licensed. The city has received complaints from older homeowners who let properties deteriorate." Eleanor stopped. "Isaiah Turner's home is paid for." "I didn't say it wasn't." "You knew which homeowner I meant." The smile disappeared. For half a second, neither spoke. Then Vance opened his vehicle door. "Be careful helping people with matters you don't fully understand." Eleanor met his eyes. "I spent 32 years reading property records." Vance climbed inside. "Then you should know a signature has consequences." He drove away. Eleanor remained on the sidewalk. She should have been thinking about his warning. Instead, she was thinking about something else. She had never told him Isaiah signed anything. She waited until the patrol car disappeared before writing his exact words in her notebook. Then she underlined one sentence. "A signature has consequences." That afternoon, she called a number she had not dialed in 11 years. Celia Grant answered on the fourth ring. "Eleanor Bennett?" "Still remembers my number. I still remember the woman who found 3 missing deed pages in a file everybody else swore was complete." Eleanor smiled despite herself. They had worked opposite ends of the same fraud cases for 6 years. Celia for the county prosecutor, Eleanor in records, and had stayed friendly the way colleagues do, through Christmas cards that thinned out and eventually stopped. Celia was now an investigator with Georgia's Office of the Attorney General, Financial Crimes Against Older Adults. Eleanor explained what she had found. Celia stopped joking. Do not email those documents. Why? Because Southern Heritage Home Renewal has appeared in 2 complaints outside Ashford. Eleanor sat straighter. What kind? Property liens, emergency repair agreements, elderly homeowners. Any prosecutions? Not enough evidence. I have 2 files and a man who won't open his door. Then you may have what we've been missing. They met the next morning at a diner 18 miles outside town. Celia arrived in plain clothes with a legal pad and ordered unsweetened tea. Eleanor brought copies. Nothing original. Samuel had taught her long ago never to carry every key on the same ring. Celia read the files slowly. When she reached Isaiah's notarization page, she looked up. You caught this? I spent 12 years checking recording numbers. This notarization existed before the claimed inspection. Yes. Celia set Ruth's file beside it. And this one too. Yes. For several minutes, only the sounds of silverware and quiet conversation filled the diner. Then Celia spoke. We suspected the company was searching for properties owned outright by older residents. Mortgage-free houses. Mostly. People living alone? Mostly. Eleanor leaned back. So they aren't selling repairs? No. They're manufacturing debt. Celia nodded. If a homeowner can't pay, Southern Heritage offers a settlement. Sometimes they refinance the lien. Sometimes an affiliated company offers to purchase the house. For less than it's worth. Far less. Eleanor thought of Isaiah's roses. Ruth's husband's electrical work. Calvin's porch, and Calvin's hand on the doorframe. How are they choosing people? That's what we don't know. Eleanor placed the hospital discharge papers on the table. Start here. Celia's expression changed. All 3 homeowners had left Ashford Memorial within hours of first contact. Eleanor, do not investigate anyone inside that hospital yourself. I wasn't planning to. That answer would comfort me more if I didn't know you. Eleanor called Patricia Sloan that evening and asked her to come sit on the back porch. She laid it out plainly, because Patricia deserved plainly. 3 homeowners, 3 discharges. Somebody had known when each of them would be alone in an empty house. Patricia did not answer for a long time. The magnolia moved in the dark. You know what you're asking me. I do. I'm 68 years old, Eleanor. I've got a pension from that hospital and a daughter in Savannah with 2 kids in school. Patricia's voice was not angry. That was somehow worse. You're asking me to go into a system I still have a login for and look at something that isn't mine to look at. If somebody notices, they don't say Patricia made a mistake. They say Patricia stole records. And then it isn't a pension anymore. It's a lawyer. I know. Then why are you asking? Eleanor thought about how to answer that honestly, and decided the honest answer was the only one worth giving. Because a man closed his door on me yesterday. He's 76, and he's scared, and he'd rather lose $14,000 than find out what happens if he makes noise. And I keep thinking that's exactly what they built. Not the liens, the quiet. She looked over. And if it stays quiet, they'll do it to you next. And you'll be too ashamed to tell me. Patricia was silent for a while. I'm not opening medical records, she said finally. I want that understood. I sit on the patient advisory committee. That gives me the administrative access log. Who opened what, not what's in it. That's the line, and I'm not crossing it. That's all I need. That's what people always say. She called back 2 days later, and her voice was pitched low, the way people speak in their own kitchens when they no longer feel safe there. Isaiah's discharge status was viewed 27 minutes before he left. That sounds normal. By clinical staff, yes. A pause. But somebody else opened the non-medical portion of his file, a hospital community partnership account. Eleanor felt the chill move through her chest. What does that show? Address, emergency contact, transportation arrangements, whether someone is returning home alone. Eleanor stared through the kitchen window toward Samuel's old workshop. Can you check Ruth and Calvin? I already did. The silence that followed told her the answer before Patricia gave it. Same account. Before they left the building. Patricia, don't thank me either. Just finish it. Her voice cracked slightly. Because I logged that query under my own name, Eleanor. That's how the system works. Whatever happens now, my name is in it too. Eleanor called Celia immediately. This time Celia did not ask whether she was certain. She asked something stranger. Who knows you found this? Rachel. You. Patricia. Anyone at City Hall? I asked about complaint records. Police? Eleanor thought about Vance. One officer knows I'm asking questions. Celia was quiet. Then she said, lock your doors tonight. At 7:40 the next morning, Eleanor opened her front door. A bright orange notice had been fastened to it. Emergency Property Review. The city claimed a structural complaint had been filed against her home. Eleanor read the time printed at the bottom. The complaint had been entered at 6:18 that morning. Then she looked down the street. A Southern Heritage truck was already turning the corner. It stopped beside her mailbox. 2 men climbed out. She did not open the door. Instead, she called Celia. They're here. Who? Southern Heritage. Celia's voice sharpened. Do not sign anything. I wasn't planning to. A city inspector arrived 6 minutes later. Then Sergeant Thomas Vance. That told Eleanor more than the orange notice ever could. Vance walked toward the porch. Mrs. Bennett, we received a report concerning foundation instability. My foundation was inspected last year. Conditions change. So do stories. His jaw tightened. The city inspector shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor remained behind the storm door. Do you have a warrant? This is an administrative safety inspection. That wasn't my question. Vance looked at the Southern Heritage workers, then back at her. We can come back with the proper paperwork. I recommend it. They left without entering. But before Vance reached his vehicle, Eleanor called after him. Sergeant! He turned. Who filed the complaint? Anonymous. What time? His expression remained still. You have the notice. I do. She held it against the glass. 6:18. For the first time, Vance appeared uncertain, only slightly. But Eleanor had spent 3 decades watching witnesses in courthouse hallways. She knew the moment a man realized he had confirmed something he was never told. That afternoon, Celia arrived with an investigator from the State Fraud Unit. They photographed the notice and pulled the administrative record. Southern Heritage had created an estimate for foundation repair at Eleanor's exact address at 5:51 that morning. 27 minutes before the anonymous city complaint. They're telling you to stop, Celia said. Eleanor looked at her house. Samuel had laid the back patio himself. Rachel's height marks were still penciled inside the pantry door. A magnolia planted on their 20th anniversary shaded the bedroom window. No, Eleanor said. They're telling me what matters to them. She asked Celia for one more thing before she left. The underlying emergency order. Not the orange notice, the court authorization that made the notice legal. It came through by fax that evening, and Eleanor read it standing at the kitchen counter with her coat still on. The order was routine. 2 paragraphs, a seal, a signature block. She had handled 10,000 like it. And in the docket line, tucked between the year and the case type, sat a 3-digit sequence that no automatic system in Georgia would have generated. Eleanor set the page down very carefully. She pulled Isaiah's order from the folder. The same. Ruth's. The same. For a moment she did not feel triumph, or even anger. She felt the particular vertigo of a floor giving way in a house you have lived in your whole life. Because she was not looking at evidence of a stranger's crime. She was looking at a habit. A small, stubborn, 40-year habit belonging to a man who had once spent a Saturday helping Samuel move a refrigerator, who had sent white roses to the funeral, who had told Rachel at a church fundraiser that her mother represented everything decent about public service. Paul Mercer had signed the order to inspect her house. And he had signed it the way he signed everything, by hand, outside the clerk system, with his own private number on it, because he had never in his life trusted a machine to keep track of what he did. He came to see her 2 days later. She had known he would. That was the other thing about Paul Mercer. He did not send people. He arrived himself, hat in hand, with the unhurried courtesy of a man who had spent 24 years being the most reasonable person in every room he entered. He admired the magnolia from the porch steps. "Samuel planted this the year of the drought. I told him he was wasting his money." "He said you told him that twice." Mercer laughed. A real laugh, warm and easy, and Eleanor felt it land somewhere under her ribs. He did not come inside. He stood on the porch with his hands folded and talked for a while about the courthouse, about how the records office had never been the same after she left, about a clerk who had recently filed a deed in the wrong century. Eleanor answered him. Some part of her wanted to keep answering him. Then he said gently, "Eleanor, this business with the orange notice on your door, that was clumsy and it shouldn't have happened, and I want you to know I'm going to see it withdrawn. That's kind of you. It's not kind, it's correct." He turned his hat once in his hands. There's a great deal of confusion right now about these repair companies. Some of them are bad actors. Some of them are just sloppy. And there are people in this county who would very much like to make it into a story about corruption, because a story about corruption gets somebody elected. He looked at her, and his eyes were tired and fond. "You've got 3 folders and a friend at the Attorney General's office and a habit of being right. I'm asking you, as somebody who has known you since you were 31, to let the state handle the state's business." Eleanor stood very still, because he had just told her 3 things he should not have known, that there were 3 folders, that Celia Grant was involved, and that the pressure had reached far enough up that a magistrate had come to her porch about it personally. And because he had done it with genuine affection. That was the part she would think about for months afterward. He was not performing. He had simply arrived at a place in his life where warmth toward a woman he liked and a scheme that took her neighbors' homes could coexist without friction, the way 2 rooms coexist in one house. "Paul," she said. "Yes." "Do you still put your own number in the docket line?" Something happened in his face. It was very small, and it was gone almost at once, and Eleanor, who had spent 32 years watching people receive news in courthouse hallways, read it as clearly as if he had said it aloud. "Old habits," he said pleasantly. "They are." He put his hat on. "Give my regards to Rachel." She watched his car until it turned off her street, and then she sat down on the top step because her legs had decided to stop. Rachel called that night from Macon, Safe Years Foundation, nonprofit incorporated 4 years ago, mission statement about protecting senior housing stability. "Mom, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful structure." "Rachel." "Sorry. Professional admiration." Papers rustled. "Here's the shape of it. Southern Heritage creates the lien. Homeowner can't pay. An LLC I've traced through 3 name changes buys the house at about 40% of assessed value. Then that LLC pays Safe Years Foundation a consulting fee for housing transition advisory services, which as far as I can tell means nothing at all, and Safe Years pays board honoraria. To whom? That's the part I can't get. Honoraria under a threshold don't itemize on the public return. A pause. But the chairman's name is on the filing, and it's a magistrate named Paul Mercer, and the legal advisor is an assistant county attorney named Leonard Graves. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Mom? You know those names." "I've known Paul Mercer for 40 years, Eleanor said. "He stood at your father's funeral." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to be all right?" "No," Eleanor said, "but I'm going to be accurate." 2 days later, she was driving home from the outreach center when blue lights appeared behind her. Vance approached her window. "Your vehicle was reported in connection with the unauthorized possession of confidential records." Eleanor kept both hands visible. By whom? Step out, please. She complied. Vance produced a signed administrative order and searched a canvas bag on the passenger seat. Eleanor read the order carefully. It allowed seizure of copied municipal documents. It did not allow access to medical information. She told him so. Vance stopped searching. Where are the originals? Eleanor looked at him. I never told you there were originals. The roadside seemed to become very quiet. Vance stepped closer, though his voice stayed controlled. Mrs. Bennett, you are involving yourself in something that can hurt people. People are already being hurt. You don't understand the size of it. Then explain it to me. And for a moment, she was almost certain of this afterward. He was going to. He looked down the empty highway. 18 years in this county, a uniform he had wanted since he was 9 years old. 4 years ago, I signed something, he said, a statement about a code inspection I wasn't at. Took me about 6 seconds. Somebody needed an officer's name on a form, and I was the officer standing there. He was not looking at her. You want to know the size of it. That's the size of it. It's 6 seconds, and then it's a second one, and then one day somebody explains to you very politely that the first one is enough to end you, so you may as well be useful. Eleanor said carefully, that can be told to the right people. By me? Vance almost smiled. Ma'am, I'm the one they'll hand over. I've known that since about year 2. He handed back the bag. Go home. Eleanor reached for her car door. A sudden pressure tightened across her chest. She stopped. Vance's expression changed immediately. Whatever else he was, he recognized a medical emergency. He called the ambulance himself, and he stayed until it came. And Eleanor, lightheaded, furious, frightened, understood that both of those things were true about the same man at the same time. At Ashford Memorial, doctors kept her overnight for observation. No heart attack, no permanent damage, stress-related cardiac symptoms. Rachel arrived furious and frightened. Celia arranged for Eleanor's registration to be restricted. Only necessary staff were supposed to see her room number. At 9:30 that evening, Eleanor opened her Bible. The brass key was still taped beneath the back cover, where she had kept it for years when traveling. At 10:05, a nurse came in with a small paper cup. Eleanor looked at it. What's this? Metoprolol, 25. I'm not on metoprolol. The nurse checked her screen, and Eleanor watched her face go through the 3 stages she had seen 100 times in the records office. Certainty, doubt, and then the careful blankness of a person who has just realized the paperwork is wrong and cannot yet say so out loud. It's on the order. Then the order is wrong, Eleanor said. And I'd like you to leave it in the cup, please, and I'd like you to write down who entered it, and I'd like to speak to the charge nurse. She did not take it. She sat with her hands folded and she waited, and when the charge nurse came, she said the same thing again, politely, 3 times. At 10:40, she called Patricia Sloan. At 11:15, Patricia called back, and her voice had lost all of its earlier hesitation, because fear about a pension is one thing and this was another. Eleanor, that order didn't come from your care team. Whose login? The community partnership account. The same one. A shaking breath. It's not even a clinical account. It should not be able to touch a medication record. Somebody built that permission in and left it there. Would it have hurt me? With your history and what you came in with, Patricia said. It wouldn't have looked like anything but a bad night. That's what frightens me. It wouldn't have looked like anything. Eleanor sat in the dark for a long moment, listening to the green numbers tick on the monitor. Then she called Celia Grant and said, it stopped being about houses about an hour ago. Celia was at the hospital in 35 minutes. She brought 2 state investigators, a hospital compliance officer who arrived in a sweatshirt, and a preservation order for the pharmacy log, and by midnight, the paper cup and its contents were sealed, photographed, and in an evidence bag. At 12:20, the compliance officer found that someone had accessed Eleanor's room assignment from a city government terminal at 10:17. Celia looked at Eleanor across the bed. They know you're alone in a room with a door. Yes. I can move you tonight. Eleanor considered it. She thought about Calvin Brooks's hand on the doorframe and about a system built so that frightened people stayed frightened. Or, she said, you can leave me exactly where I am and put somebody in the room across the hall. The nurse call button was disconnected at 1:35 in the morning and replaced with a silent signal routed to the observation room. The small digital recorder went inside the Bible's back cover, behind a fresh strip of tape. The brass key they left taped underneath was a hardware store copy, cut that afternoon. The real one had not left the bank in 6 days. At 2:13, the hallway went quiet. Eleanor heard the door open. Sergeant Thomas Vance stepped inside and closed it behind him. The room was dim, except for the light above the sink and the green numbers on the monitor. He crossed to the chair beside her bed, where her Bible rested. His eyes went first to the book, not to her. That was his mistake. You should be sleeping, he said. Eleanor opened her eyes. You should be home. He froze. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Vance exhaled. I'm trying to keep this from getting worse. By searching a hospital room at 2 in the morning? You have something people are looking for. A key. His eyes flicked toward the Bible. That was all Eleanor needed. The box is empty, she said. Vance stared at her. What box? You tell me. His careful expression finally cracked. He reached for the Bible, lifted it, and found the key taped underneath exactly where he had been told it would be. He peeled it free. Somebody put a medication order on me tonight, Eleanor said. His hand stopped. That wasn't... He caught himself. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. That wasn't anything I knew about. I believe you. She watched him. Think about what that means, Sergeant. You're the one they sent for a key. You're not the one they tell about the rest of it. Stop. Isaiah's roof. Ruth's panel. Calvin's porch. A man so frightened he won't open his own door. I said stop. His voice never became a shout. That made the moment more unsettling. Eleanor looked at the brass key in his hand and asked the question she had already answered 5 days earlier, standing at her kitchen counter with her coat still on. Does Paul Mercer know you're here? Vance went completely still. Because I've read the emergency order on my own house, she said. It has his private docket sequence on it. So does Isaiah's, so does Ruth's. He's put that number on every document he's signed by hand since 1998. And I processed 9 years of them, and there is not a machine in the state of Georgia that generates it. She paused. I'm not asking whether he's involved. I'm asking whether he knows you're standing in my room. The silence went on a long time. He doesn't, Vance said quietly. Graves does. The hospital door opened. Celia Grant entered with 2 state investigators. Then let's start there, she said. Vance stepped backward. One investigator asked him to place the key on the counter, and he did, and there was no struggle and no shouting, only the small sound of metal touching laminate. Celia picked up the Bible. That key's a copy, she told him. The real one never left the bank. Vance looked at Eleanor, and she watched him understand it. The room had never been a place where she was trapped. It was a place where he was observed. By sunrise, his attorney had arrived. By noon, he had begun talking. Not enough to save himself. Enough to frighten everyone above him. Southern Heritage was only one piece. A hospital administrator supplied discharge information. A city code supervisor generated complaints. Vance and 2 other officers provided an official presence when frightened homeowners hesitated. Money moved out through Safe Years Foundation as consulting fees and came back as honoraria. But the emergency orders that gave the whole scheme its appearance of legality came from the magistrate's office. That afternoon, Paul Mercer appeared on local television. He expressed shock over Sergeant Vance's conduct. He promised full cooperation. Then he said something that made Eleanor sit upright in her hospital bed. No individual officer, Mercer told reporters, has the authority to create or approve these property actions. Celia understood it too. He's preparing to sacrifice Vance. Not just Vance, Eleanor said. Listen to the sentence. He's not defending the orders. He's establishing that the orders were valid, and only the officer was corrupt. She shook her head slowly. Paul is very good at this. He always was. He's not lying to the reporters. He's writing the closing argument. By the time investigators obtained access to Mercer's administrative account, 6 months of history had been deleted. That evening, Southern Heritage began moving money. The next morning, its Ashford office was nearly empty. Someone had warned them. Celia closed the door to Eleanor's room. 7 people knew we were preparing a preservation order. Me, 2 investigators, my supervisor, a paralegal, the hospital's compliance officer, and the assistant county attorney who countersigned the local filing, which is Leonard Graves. Which is Leonard Graves, Celia said. And before you say it, he's also the man Vance named at 2 in the morning. Then don't arrest him. Celia looked up. He's the only person in that building who thinks he's still invisible, Eleanor said. If you take him today, you get 1 man. If you leave him where he is, he'll go on being useful to them. Leonard Graves visited her the next afternoon. He was 61, silver-haired, soft-spoken, and respected across Ashford. He brought Rachel coffee. He brought Eleanor a small bouquet. And he brought an offer. If Eleanor signed a statement saying she could not personally verify how Southern Heritage had obtained the homeowners' information, the city would immediately cancel the emergency review of her property. Her house would be cleared. No fines, no inspection, no legal expense. Rachel read it first. Mom. Eleanor already understood. They were offering her something she already had a right to possess. Peace, in exchange for uncertainty. She turned to the last page and asked a simple question. Who drafted this? The county legal office. Which office? Mine. Eleanor looked at the document control number in the footer. It began with AGH. County legal documents used ACL. Ashford County Legal. AGH belonged to 1 desk in the entire building. Ashford Government Housing. The emergency housing office administered by Paul Mercer's Senior Housing Protection Council. She handed the document back. I won't sign it. Graves appeared disappointed. Mrs. Bennett, you could end a great deal of trouble. No. Think about your daughter. Rachel sat straighter. Eleanor's voice remained gentle. My daughter is 37 years old and knows how to read a document. Rachel almost smiled. Graves left. Celia arrived 20 minutes later and pulled the file metadata. The settlement had been drafted on a computer in the magistrate's private conference office, but Mercer's access card showed him giving a public speech across town at the time. Security footage supplied the rest. Leonard Graves. The man who had just offered Eleanor peace. Celia wanted to arrest him. Eleanor asked her to wait 1 more day. He's already warned them once. Give him something to warn them about. So Celia built it. 3 people received 3 different pieces of information. Mercer was told the original homeowner contracts were being stored at the courthouse. The hospital administrator, under suspicion, was told they had been moved to a state evidence vault. And Leonard Graves was told they were in Eleanor Bennett's safe deposit box, Box 4517 at First Georgia Bank, opened by a small brass key. There was no Box 4517. At 8:12 the next morning, a man walked into First Georgia Bank and requested access to it, with forged authorization papers. He was an employee of Southern Heritage. By noon, investigators had followed him to a warehouse 27 miles outside Ashford. Inside were hundreds of property files, deeds, repair contracts, recorded liens, copies of hospital discharge summaries, photographs of homes belonging mostly to elderly residents. Isaiah Turner's file sat near the top of one cabinet. Across its cover, someone had written 3 words: "Owns free and clear." Eleanor looked a long time at the photograph Celia sent her. They had never been searching for broken houses. They had been searching for people who had spent a lifetime paying them off. The warehouse changed everything overnight. More than 70 homeowners appeared in the files. Some had signed repair agreements. Some had paid inflated bills. 11 had sold their homes to companies connected to Southern Heritage after being told their liens would otherwise grow. The oldest was 88. The youngest was 67. Most lived alone. Nearly all owned their homes outright. 39 had been patients at Ashford Memorial shortly before the first complaint appeared. Investigators arrested Leonard Graves that afternoon. Presented with the bank surveillance and the warehouse records, he began cooperating within the hour. Mercer had designed the structure, he said. Southern Heritage created the debt. Code enforcement created the urgency. Official-looking court orders created the fear. Graves also said Mercer had booked a flight out of Atlanta for the following afternoon. Celia expected Eleanor to feel vindicated. Instead, Eleanor sat quietly for a long time with her hands in her lap. People imagined betrayal as a dramatic moment, a confession, a raised voice, a man showing you his real face. Eleanor had learned otherwise. The deepest betrayals arrived quietly, and what they took from you was not the present but the past. They reached backward and made you reconsider things you had already finished feeling. Paul Mercer had eaten at church fundraisers. He had visited Samuel in the hospital. He had shaken Isaiah Turner's hand at a Veterans Day ceremony and asked after his wife's roses. He had stood on Eleanor's porch 4 days ago and admired a magnolia tree, and every word of it had been sincere. None of it had stopped him. That was the part she could not put down. There was one problem. Much of the case against Mercer rested on electronic records his attorney could challenge, and 6 months of those records had already been deleted. Eleanor asked to see one of the original emergency orders recovered from the warehouse. Celia brought Isaiah's. Eleanor ran her finger across the embossed seal and stopped. This seal is wrong. It looks official. It is official. That's what's wrong with it, she explained. Emergency orders prepared after courthouse hours were sealed with a manual embosser kept in a locked cabinet. 3 people had ever been authorized to use it: Mercer, his senior clerk, and Eleanor Bennett. The impression is deeper on the left side, she said. Does that matter? Paul always pressed with his left hand. Old shoulder injury. Celia stared at her. Can you prove that? Not from the seal. Eleanor turned the page, but this might. A handwritten time appeared beside the filing stamp. 9:17 p.m. Mercer wrote his 7s with a short horizontal line struck through the center. Eleanor had seen it thousands of times. More importantly, handwriting could be tested, and this document had come out of the conspirator's own warehouse. It had never passed through her hands, or the state's, or anyone's who could be accused of putting it there. The state laboratory confirmed the handwriting the next morning. Then Graves produced something stronger still, a recording of a meeting in which Mercer's voice could be heard discussing homeowners who had equity but no leverage, and describing official pressure as a way to make an unfair offer look like relief. Celia listened to it in silence. We have enough. Eleanor shook her head. For an arrest, maybe. What else do you want? I want the liens gone. Eleanor looked at Isaiah's file. If you arrest every man in this and leave a 79-year-old fighting a $28,000 lien with a lawyer he can't afford, then the system still won. It just changed staff. Within hours, the Attorney General's office requested an emergency hearing to freeze Southern Heritage's assets, void the fraudulent liens, and halt all pending property transfers. Paul Mercer arrived at the hearing with 2 attorneys, through the same courthouse doors Eleanor had walked through for 32 years. He saw her seated beside Isaiah Turner. For the first time in almost 40 years, he did not smile. The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The records spoke more clearly than anger ever could. Investigators presented the warehouse files, the hospital access logs, the false complaints, the Southern Heritage estimates created before those complaints existed, the transfers through Safe Years Foundation, the pharmacy order entered at 10:05 p.m. on a non-clinical account. Then came the emergency orders in Mercer's handwriting. His attorney challenged the timeline. The state produced the access logs. He challenged Graves's credibility. The state produced the bank surveillance. He challenged Eleanor. That was when the courtroom grew quiet. At 64, Eleanor Bennett walked to the witness stand inside a building she knew almost as well as her own home. She swore to tell the truth. Mercer's attorney approached. "Mrs. Bennett, you have no law degree, correct?" "Correct. You are not a forensic document examiner." "No. You are not a police investigator." "No. Then why should this court rely on your interpretation of these records?" Eleanor looked out at Isaiah, whose old cap rested in his hands, at Ruth, at Calvin Brooks, who had driven himself to the courthouse that morning without telling anyone he was coming, and who had opened his door to a state investigator 3 days after the warehouse story reached the news. At Rachel. Finally at Paul Mercer. "Because I'm not asking the court to rely on my interpretation." She turned toward the files. "I'm asking the court to read the dates." Silence. The company prepared the work before the complaints existed. The orders were created outside the ordinary filing system. The hospital information was opened before these people ever got home. None of that requires my opinion. It requires a clock. Mercer's attorney changed direction. "These homeowners signed contracts." "Yes. Adults are responsible for the documents they sign." Eleanor nodded. "They are." He paused, perhaps surprised by the answer. Then Eleanor added, "And people who deliberately misrepresent those documents are responsible for that too." Isaiah closed his eyes. Rachel looked down, smiling faintly. The judge denied every attempt to delay. By late afternoon, enforcement of all 73 liens connected to Southern Heritage was suspended pending review. 11 pending home transfers were stopped. The Safe Years accounts were frozen. Then Celia Grant came through the side door carrying a sealed folder. Mercer saw her, and his expression changed. He stood before anyone asked him to. "This is unnecessary." Celia approached calmly. "You'll have the opportunity to respond through counsel." Mercer looked across the courtroom at Eleanor. "You think you saved these people?" Eleanor considered the question. "No." "Then what do you think you did?" She looked at Isaiah. "He saved his own house when he asked somebody to read the paper." That ended the conversation. 6 months later, Southern Heritage Home Renewal no longer existed. More than $4 million in claims and questionable liens had been canceled or placed under court-supervised review. 9 families recovered homes that had not yet been resold. Others received settlements from frozen assets. Ashford Memorial replaced its community access system entirely and now required independent authorization before any non-clinical account could view discharge information or touch a medication record. Patricia Sloan kept her pension. She also kept the letter the hospital sent her, which thanked her for her service on the advisory committee and did not mention what she had actually done. Leonard Graves entered a cooperation agreement. Thomas Vance resigned from the department and pleaded to charges connected to the scheme. His cooperation helped investigators identify similar operations in 2 neighboring counties. He wrote Eleanor 1 letter from a county facility. It was 4 sentences long, and 3 of them were about the 6 seconds it takes to sign your name to something. Eleanor never answered it. She did not throw it away either. But the part she remembered most happened on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Isaiah Turner stood in front of his little white house on Hawthorne Street. The roses his wife had planted were blooming along the porch rail. He held a single sheet of paper. The lien had been canceled. $28,400. Gone. He read the court order twice. then folded it carefully into quarters. I spent 46 years paying for this place. I know. And I kept thinking one signature could erase all that. Eleanor looked at the house, the porch, the paint, the crooked rail he'd been meaning to fix since spring. No signature can erase 46 years. Isaiah touched one of the rose leaves. My wife chose these. I remember. He smiled. She'd be mad if somebody took her roses. Eleanor laughed. So would I. The following month, Eleanor and Rachel opened a free document review table on Saturday mornings in the fellowship hall at New Hope Baptist. They called it Read Before You Sign. Retired teachers volunteered. A former banker joined them. 2 lawyers gave up their Saturdays. Calvin Brooks came the 3rd week, sat down at the far end, and stayed. And it turned out that a man who had once been too frightened to open his own door was very good at talking other frightened people through theirs. People brought insurance letters, repair contracts, medical bills, mortgage notices, and documents they were embarrassed to admit they did not understand. Eleanor never let that embarrassment stay long. There were 2 rules, written on a card at the front of the table. There is no shame in asking what a document means. Never let urgency borrow your signature. One autumn afternoon, she came home from the hall and found the light going gold across Samuel's magnolia. The orange notice was long gone from her door. She opened her Bible in the quiet bedroom, and there was the little strip of tape where the brass key had once been hidden. The real key had come home from the bank weeks ago. Rachel had asked why she kept it. Eleanor set it back inside the cover and closed the book. Outside, the houses along her street were lighting one window at a time. Ordinary homes, bought with ordinary wages, kept by ordinary people who had simply refused, once, to sign something they had not read. Power could make people afraid to speak. Paperwork could make injustice look respectable. A uniform could make a warning sound official. None of it changed the truth. It only delayed the day somebody sat down and read it carefully.